Welcome, everybody, once again to DAZN MMA. We are back. Sean O'Connell here with Dan Hardy. Lots to get into in the combat sports world and the sport of mixed martial arts. Dan, let's start with your wallpaper, though. What is going on with the floral print? I need to know.
I'm on the road, man. I'm on the road. This is a nice old country house in the Lake District in England. So I just came away for a couple of days to visit my family. It's a beautiful place, but they're all decorated like this old country house. You know, it's very, very English.
I was hoping you were saying that this is just a glimpse into the softer side of the outlaw, but I will take vacation home for an answer. Fine. All right, let's talk about the title fight that we just saw unfold at UFC 287. Not just a rematch, but in some ways a quadrilogy match between Israel Adesanya and a guy who, going into this fight, we thought was like one of the scariest dudes walking planet Earth, and I still think we might feel that way about him in Pereira. Israel Adesanya got the win, though, in emphatic fashion. Got the knockout, got the TKO finish. And all of us want to do this with the losses on our record. Now, I can't imagine how much more earnest the effort was for Israel Adesanya, because you go back to the kickboxing, right? And the fact that this is a dude who's been excellent in combat sports, but the problem in front of him in Pereira, he hadn't solved it in 3 outings. And he finally gets the job done. What do you think of the performance?
I thought it was an incredible performance. You know, I thought it took a lot of courage to fight the way he did. It was the right thing to do. I mean, you know, what we've learned from Pereira, well, certainly in the Adesanya fights, but against everybody else, is that he's very, very good moving forward, power striking. But he doesn't seem to move too well backwards. And, you know, Adesanya got a couple of glimpses of that in their most recent fight in MMA, the first fight in MMA, you know, where he staggered him with that right hand at the end of the first round. He was able to push him onto his back foot, because Pereira has a habit of leaning away. And I think, you know, Adesanya knew that if he fought, you know, an aggressive, forthright, stand in the center of the octagon kind of game plan for the most part, that he was going to be able to hold his own, even with the size disadvantage. And I thought he looked well. And then, you know, I thought he did well with that. And then when he got backed up against the fence, of course, you know, they're the moments where everybody's reminiscing about their previous fight where he was stopped, but Adesanya just drew him in. It was a lovely performance. You know, we don't get to see very many people fighting off the fence very, very cleverly like that. You know, of course, you know, Muhammad Ali being able to rope-a-dope. You can't do that in mixed martial arts. We don't see people really fighting with their back up against the fence and counter-striking. And I can't help but feel that was something that Adesanya had seen in his head. He'd replayed the finish of their last fight in his head over and over again. And he saw those moments where he's very eager, but he's punching from the waist, from the hips, because he keeps his elbows so close to his midsection, which is why he generates power. And Adesanya to double that right hand over the top. And, you know, if you look where it lands as well, it was very, very similar to the target that he landed at the end of the first round of their last fight. It was a spectacular performance, you know, and completely surprised me. I kind of felt like Pereira got his number.
Yeah, it was interesting because in the previous fight, in those situations where he's getting backed up against the cage, not as comfortable there, right? It looked like obviously he had drilled this, and all of us do it, right? When you get into that situation, you'll bounce off the cage and you'll try to go chest to chest. You'll maybe grab a hold, but that's not a place you want to be with a bigger, stronger fighter. And great work by Israel Adesanya to make adjustments. We talk all the time about the ability to make adjustments in fight, right? And having an opportunity to go back, evaluate the tape, know what maybe lost you the first bout, maybe what you weren't able to fully capitalize on because Pereira was saved by the bell, I think, in that first bout, and say, how do I get into that situation again earlier in a round where I can finish that combination, where I can finish that fight? And Israel Adesanya got it done. I mean, he's one of the best middleweights we've ever had in the sport. And I don't mind seeing a guy lose, have to learn a lesson, come back, and then show us what champions do, right? I mean, George St. Pierre did that. Anderson Silva had to do that in his career. Obviously, we just saw it from Israel Adesanya. He did silence some of the speculation immediately post-fight. Israel Adesanya, with folks asking him, oh, man, for sure we're going to see a trilogy in MMA. We're going to see a third, right? The rubber match. Israel Adesanya has other ideas.
Traditionally, right, everyone's going to be like, oh, well, it's 1-1 in MMA. There should be a trilogy.
I don't keep score. I settle them.
But I'm gonna
now
say-
it's settled. Look, I gave him a fast track to the belt. You know, I could have said, nah, who has he fought? Like, he fought one top 5. Nah, but, you know, he did well, fought some all right guys, and beat the Strickland. I was like, okay, fine. There's no one else. But also, I was looking for that challenge. The guy that beat me in kickboxing, I was looking for that challenge. That's why I took that fight. The rematch, I got the immediate rematch because of what I've done in this game. I won the belt against Kevin. I defended against Rob, Romero, Costa, Vittori, Rob again, Cannonier. That's 7. My other belt will have 7 fucking gems on it, you know? So I did the hard yards, and I earned my fucking rematch, you know? Now he's got to do the hard yards if he wants to do that, but I don't think he's going to, because he go cause problems at 205, and good luck to everybody else, because he's a to deal with. I'll tell you that.
So Israel Adesanya wants Pereira to do the hard yards. What that actually looks like for Pereira is going to be equally interesting for me, right? Because he's a guy that to fight for the title and to chase after Israel Adesanya, who he had an old rivalry with, I think he was willing to do those insane weight cuts. Is 185 pounds the right home for him moving forward? I kind of like Izzy's suggestion, but your thoughts on what Israel Adesanya had to say about making Pereira earn himself another rematch?
You know, I didn't mind it. I thought he made some really good points. You know, of course, it's a fight that people would be interested in seeing again, but, you know, I don't mind the idea of them kind of parting ways right now. And you know, Pereira is most likely going to move up to 205. Imagine if he gets the belt at 205, that might be something that would entice Adesanya into a rematch, because there'd be something additional on the line. And then, of course, he'd feel like Pereira's, you know, proved himself as an opponent again. But, you know, I think there are other people in the middleweight division that, you know, that are moving in Adesanya's direction. And I think he's going to cut through the competition pretty comfortably. So within a couple of fights, I imagine that he's going to be back in there with Pereira anyway, whether it's at 185 or 205. My feeling is really, though, if Pereira allows himself to go up to light heavyweight, he's never coming back down. I'll tell you something that I noticed. So as he was walking out, as Pereira was walking out to the octagon, one of the security guards standing at the side of him, his name's Tiny, and he's 6'5". He's massive. And as they were walking out, Pereira looked the same size as him. I don't know exactly, you know, how he looked so big, but I know how big that man is, how big Tiny is. He's called Tiny for a reason. He's massive, and Pereira looked, you know, sizable compared to him. I just think if he lets his body go up a weight class, there's no getting back down to 185. He should probably never have been 185 in the first place.
Also for Pereira, I think there's an interesting storyline to be found if he can go up to 205, fight a top 10 guy right away, and why wouldn't he be given a matchup like that? If he can win that, there's an easy rivalry to be built with the current 205-pound champion. If Jamal Hill still holds the title, I mean, we have a stare-down picture from when Jamal Hill beat Glover Teixeira, and Pereira was in his corner, right? If you remember that image, obviously you go shake hands with the corner, right? Hey, great job. Hey, I'm the title. Like I'm the guy with the title right now. But Jamal Hill was being a good sport. And the death stare that came from Pereira, he was sizing him up. And by the way, he was looking down at Jamal Hill when he did that, to drive home your point about how big Pereira is. So I think he might actually earn a title shot at 205 faster than he would earn an Israel Adesanya rematch at 185, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is an obvious storyline there. And you know, given the fact that there's, you know, it's kind of a wide open division right now. Obviously, I don't think, you know, Glover Teixeira is going to be back in there for a title shot, which makes way for Pereira to step right in there and, you know, within a couple of fights be contending for the belt. I thought, to be honest, this was going to be his last fight at middleweight, regardless of whether he won or lost. I think if he was coming off a win, we would see that fight against Jamal Hill straight away. But then, you know, if you look down the division at other people that he could fight, I mean, you know, if I'm picking, I would want to see him fight someone like a Johnny Walker, you know, someone like a Alexander Rakic, long, rangy striker. Johnny Walker, of course, because he's very awkward. He's very, very big for the weight class anyway. So, it might throw some Alex Pereira kind of problems back in Pereira's direction to deal with someone as big and powerful. But at the same time, Johnny Walker doesn't necessarily take a punch like a light heavyweight. So, that would be a very fun matchup to get, Pereira moving up in the division. It's the likes of Nikita Krylov that you don't want to see him fight, because they're most likely going to be able to take him down at this point. But you could certainly carve out a path for the, through the light heavyweight division within a couple of fights to the belt with Jamal.
Yeah, there's not a lot of super elite grapplers at the top end of 205 right now. So perhaps a very bright future for Pereira at light heavyweight. Now let's talk about, I think, the more important question on people's minds right now. What's next for Israel Adesanya? He's cleared out the division in a lot of ways. If you're not going to have an immediate Pereira rematch, people are throwing out the name Khamzat Chimaev. I don't know if Israel Adesanya is super interested in that. I know it seemed like there was one guy who he had on his mind whose name he would not say in the post-fight presser. But what does Dan Hardy want to see next for Izzy?
I'm open. I wouldn't mind the Chimaev fight, to be honest, because I think it's an interesting fight that people would want to see. And to hell with the rules and the rankings when it comes to the UFC. If the fight makes sense money-wise, then they'll make it. I do think that Chimaev could probably be positioned in the middleweight division quite quickly for a title shot. And the reality is Chimaev is going to create more buzz around the title than anybody underneath Pereira in the middleweight division right now. I mean, do you want to see him fight Vittoria again right now, or Cannonier? I know, of course, he's talking about Dricus du Plessis, but he's not ready for Adesanya right now. And the other thing as well is, I don't like how politically charged that is. I don't know whether it's understood enough around the world, the kind of problems that could potentially cause, and already is. Like, it's bordering on subjects that we don't really want to be drawing into mixed martial arts. It's I don't know. I don't know if that fight's ready to make yet, but I don't know. Chimaev's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I kind of feel like he's Pereira for the welterweight division right now. He's just a bit too big. Like, you've got to see him moving up very soon. And can he cut through the division like people expect? Quite possibly, especially with the state of the middleweight division right now. There's some big gaps in there that he could take advantage of.
And with his wrestling and pressure, he could be a big problem for people like Israel Adesanya. I mean, there's not a massive difference between the Khamzat Chimaev style, I think, and the Robert Whittaker style. But is Chimaev physically maybe more capable of imposing his will on Israel Adesanya? I don't know. I mean, I'm a big Whittaker fan, so I think that maybe I'd want to see Chimaev show us he could beat a Robert Whittaker before you give him a shot against Israel Adesanya. But again, in the UFC, it's about like what's going to be the big number on pay-per-view, and people really love the idea of either watching Chimaev beat up Israel Adesanya or the Chimaev hype train being derailed, because there's actually now some politically charged things around Khamzat Chimaev that might be problematic there. But
absolutely.
The Dricus du Plessis matchup, that Israel Adesanya, he didn't even want to say his name in the post-fight presser because he didn't want to give him clout. But he did talk about dragging his carcass across South Africa, and that's very obvious who he's referencing in that moment. And of course, that's a response from Israel Adesanya to Dricus du Plessis after his most recent win, saying, I want to be the first African champion in the UFC. And he made the points about how he lives and trains in Africa, on African soil, breathing African air, where Izzy now lives in Oceania, Kamaru Usman now lives in the United States, Francis Ngannou, obviously, no longer in the UFC, but also lives and trains in the United States. And I'm 100% with you. There's so much racial and political nuance to statements like that and to a fight like that. Is that something that the UFC wants to do? I don't think Dricus du Plessis wins that fight, by the way. But
no, I don't. No. But the other thing as well is that, potentially people that live in the region might understand the sensitivities better than people that don't. Dricus probably should know better. Being born and raised in South Africa, he should probably know better about those sensitivities. But Adesanya is just not present. He just doesn't understand, and he always says things that have they've come out of his mouth before he's processed them in his brain sometimes, I feel. And that, especially with the UFC promotional machine behind it, it could turn south very quickly. And I don't think that would be something, of course, the UFC would want or would lean into for any kind of financial benefit, because it's, it's a can of worms that would just be, it would be endless at that point. I mean, the thing is, if the fight, if Drickers works his way into that position and earns the title shot, then absolutely. But by using that as a narrative to get himself a title shot, or in fact by entertaining that idea through the narrative, is, I don't know. It's not comfortable for me. It's the same as you mentioned with Chimaev, and his links to warlords and dictators. It's there's we won't get into it on the show. I think we can stray too far away from mixed martial arts talking about this, but it certainly does taint the sport a little bit in a negative way, in my opinion.
Which means it's the right time for Israel Adesanya to talk about super fights. So, is there a super fight for Israel Adesanya? Would you like to see him chase a 205-pound belt against Jamal Hill again? Do you like the idea that Jan Blachowicz presented when he said, hey, how about we fight at 185 pounds? Blachowicz proposed that he would come down and challenge Israel Adesanya for the belt. Is that something Jan Blachowicz and Israel Adesanya, is that a rivalry you're interested in enough because of what Blachowicz did when Izzy tried to come up and take the 205-pound belt?
I think if Jan can get down to 185, I would love to see that fight. I've always thought that Jan's kind of undersized for light heavyweight when you stand him next to someone like Gustafsson or Johnny Walker. I think he's 6'2", but he's a heavily muscled guy. But there is some weight to lose there. You can imagine. I mean, we saw it with Misha Serkinov, didn't we? He went down to 185 and he looked shredded. I would imagine Jan would look the same, and he would be very, very powerful.
Misha was shredded at 205, and then he looked even more shredded when he went down. Yeah,
it's crazy, and I do feel like Jan could make the weight class if he was, if he was strict with his diet. The only thing that concerns me is that he's towards his 40s now, and well, I mean, the pounds don't come off quite as easily when you get into the big 4-0.
Unfortunately,
so that might slow
that's
him
true.
down.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, but you're like heavyweight. You're fine. You're always walking around in your weight class. I'm unfortunately a 205er as well right now. My weight class was 170. So it's the same thing with Jan though. I mean, he's always been a light heavyweight. Moving down to 185 would take a drastic lifestyle change. But then he knows he's beaten Adesanya at 205. If he goes down and wins the 185 belt, what else is there left for him to do? He's been a champ in 2 weight classes, and he can hang up his gloves before he turns 40, and retire to Poland and look after his little boy.
Which, by the way, I would love to see for Jan Blachowicz. I thought, he's not the biggest pay-per-view draw. He's not the biggest star necessarily, but Polish power is iconic, and he's always been, I think, a good representative of mixed martial arts, European mixed martial arts. I would really love to see a strong exit, a good runway for Jan Blachowicz, because it is getting to be that time where people think about it, right? Last thing on Israel Adesanya. It wasn't so long ago that, Jon Jones' name was coming out of Israel Adesanya's mouth. And a lot of writers and people close to the sport would say, hey, both of these guys look pretty unbeatable. Let's match them up against one another. I've always thought that Jon Jones was way too big. And then Pereira came in and showed that Israel can have problems with big guys. But now maybe he solved that puzzle. Is there a possibility that Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones is a fight that could be made, should be made?
I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be made and it shouldn't, because they're 2 of the biggest draws in the sport, and of course it would be a fascinating bout between someone that's clearly undersized, outreached, out-heighted, strength, but of course his technique is the thing that's always shone with Adesanya, whereas Jon Jones, especially at 205, his creativeness was lethal, but now he's moved up to heavyweight. I just feel he's going to be way too much for Adesanya at this size. It would have been an interesting fight when Jones was back down around 205, but you've got to bear in mind he's still walking at 225, 230. There was an interesting podcast I was listening to the other day with Dan Carlin talking about the boxers of old, the heavyweights, and could they hang with the boxers of today? And it actually got me thinking about this fight in my head, because I mean, of all the things that Adesanya could prove in mixed martial arts, going up to heavyweight and beating Jon Jones would be out of this world, especially if he can pass through like heavyweight and take the belt off Jamal Hill as well. I mean, what else would there be for him to do? It would put him in a Bruce Lee like category of martial artists for him to go up and beat someone the size of Jon Jones. And I don't think it's out of his capability, but it would be such a feat, because it would be the size difference. Is what would make it so impressive. I feel like Jon Jones is just finding his feet at heavyweight, though, and I feel like he's going to get better and better. It may be a fight we could make, a couple of years down the line when Adesanya is kind of winding down his career. Maybe he's moved up to 205 permanently and filled out a little bit. But it would be an incredible feat for Adesanya to be able to beat Jon Jones, and I just don't see him doing it in any weight class.
Yeah, I don't either. But we've talked about this before. I think Jon Jones has done a lot of work in proving that he is the greatest mixed martial artist on the planet, at least right now, maybe that we've ever seen. So having a guy come up and meet him 40 pounds shy of the real walking weight, that'd be a feat indeed.